Now, attachment theory is something you've probably seen online. You may have read about it. It sounds intellectual, doesn't it? But it's not. It is a simple framework backed by decades of research that is going to help you better understand how you and the other people in your life show up in a relationship. And that's exactly what I want to help you do today. I want you to have better relationships. Why? Because you deserve better relationships. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing to have a whole group of friends where you could just text them whatever you're thinking or feeling? You don't have to rewrite it 55,000 times. You don't have to worry about whether or not they're mad at you. Wouldn't it be wonderful to show up in your married life or your dating life and not feel insecure or not feel like you can't trust people? Wouldn't it be awesome to feel so secure, so deserved that you are such an awesome person, that you know exactly how you want to be treated? Wouldn't it be amazing to let love and compliments into your life? You better believe it would be amazing. And the way that you do that is you learn how to improve your relationships. Not only your relationship with yourself, but your relationship with absolutely everybody you interact with. And that's where attachment theory comes in. When you understand your attachment style and you understand how to become more securely attached, you will have a better and happier life. Full stop. You're going to feel safer, more secure. And this is the part I love the most. You'll be able to show up absolutely anywhere with anybody and be your full self. How freaking awesome does that sound? Now, it's interesting because I didn't really understand attachment theory until recently. And now that I've learned a lot about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, my husband Christopher and I have basically been talking about attachment theory for 2 years in our marriage counseling every week because we have totally different attachment styles. I also know that a lot of you that are in your 20s right now are reading that book Attached because it became super popular during the pandemic. Our daughters who are 23 and 22 are reading it. And I know that you've seen attachment theory, or maybe you've discussed attachment theory with friends or your therapist. But today, guess what? Everybody is invited to this conversation because we are going to get every one of you up to speed so that you understand yourself, you understand your attachment style, you understand attachment styles in other people, and more importantly, you can use absolutely everything that you learned today to improve your relationship to yourself and others. So, how are we going to do that? Well, I have tracked down one of the world's leading experts on attachment theory. Her name is Dr. Marissa Franco. She's a psychologist, a professor at the University of Maryland. She's also the New York Times bestselling author of the book on attachment styles and how they impact your friendships. That book, it is called Platonic. And don't you worry, I'm going to put all her information in the show notes, just like always. And that's important because it's not just your romantic relationships. You're about to learn that attachment style impacts every relationship, your friendships, your work colleagues, your family, yourself, because attachment style is all about you and how you show up in relationships. And that's why it impacts everything. So let's get you feeling secure and get Dr. Marissa Franco on the line, people. Dr. Franco, I am so excited that you're joining us. Thank you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
In your work, you describe 4 attachment styles. And so the first one is secure. What does that mean?
Secure, you are comfortable giving and receiving love. You trust that other people love you. You can bring up conflict very level-headedly. Your skill is really perspective taking. When something happens in your relationships, you are thinking about the other person's needs and your own and how to balance both of your needs. You tend to be a really good friend. You're more likely to initiate friendships, less likely to end friendships, more likely to maintain them. Very comfortable being vulnerable, but in a flexible way. Whereas anxious people, you'll see them be vulnerable. Other people aren't responding and they're still pushing vulnerability, where secure people are like, if you're not responsive to this, I'm going to become less vulnerable. They tend to look for relationships with other people that are healthy, right? Because their assumption is that I'm lovable and I deserve to be loved by other people.
So at the basis of somebody with a secure attachment style, you have an assumption that you are lovable and that you deserve to be loved.
Yeah, it's
And
kind of like you're on your own side, right?
is
Like
there
you're
anybody on the planet like that? I just, can you introduce me to them? I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Because it feels like that's a very whole and safe and healthy human being.
Yeah. And attachment is a spectrum, right? So nobody's fully secure, just like nobody's fully anxious or nobody's fully avoidant.
So the second one is anxious. So can you tell us what
Anxious.
what an anxious attachment style might be?
So your core fear is that everybody's abandoning you. You tend to see rejection even when it's not occurring. Like a friend is like tired and you're like, oh my God, they're rejecting me. They hate me. Or a friend has taken a little longer to respond to you, right? You don't consider other people's circumstances when determining how they're treating you. You just take everything personally. At the neurological level, research finds that your amygdala, which is the part of your brain associated with stress, is more sensitive. It lights up
Mm.
more than people of other attachment styles. Um, you are, kind of passive aggressive in conflict. You are very self-sacrificing until you sort of blow up because you can't take it anymore, right? Your relationships just tend to be kind of unbalanced. It's you giving, giving, giving until you can't anymore. And then you sort of just pull away. You're not very flexible. You can be kind of controlling again, because like I spoke about earlier, you need other people to soothe your emotions. So when someone is doing something and you feel triggered, you almost have to try to control them to get you to soothe your own emotions. So
Mm.
anxiously attached people, they're like kind of avoidant towards themselves. Like their internal dialogue is like, I'm too much, these feelings aren't okay, right? They very much invalidate their own feelings and emotions, which is part of the reason why they really need other people to validate themselves.
You basically just described me. I don't know if you knew that this was a therapy session for Mel Robbins, but Dr. Franco, we just have a diagnosis now. Let's talk about the third attachment style, avoidant.
Yeah. So avoidant people, they fundamentally don't trust others. They think if I get close to you, you are going to harm me. So they don't get close to others. They don't initiate as much. They're more likely to end friendships, more likely to ghost on others, not as emotional, very struggle so much with vulnerability, not only in themselves, but other people. Like if you're vulnerable with someone who's more avoidant, they might pull away from you, right? In relationships, it feels like there's a dance with them where you feel like you're getting close to them, and then all of a sudden they sort of back away. They tend to ignore problems, they minimize them, they ignore conflict, they talk like everything's always okay. And why are you making a big deal of them? Like they have this assumption that people shouldn't have needs, both them and other people. And so when it comes to friendship, they're sort of like low effort and low reward. They don't put a lot of effort into their relationships, and they also feel very disconnected from other people.
Hmm. And then you said there was a fourth one. It's not quite organized, meaning that the style is the style when it comes to connection or like trying to connect, but that it's this fourth one that's a little bit more disorganized, you said. So can you explain a little
Yeah.
bit more about that one?
Yeah, so this disorganized, it's people that have really grown up in more extreme situations like abuse. And so they have to sort of pull out the whole toolbox of strategies to try to find safety. So it's sort of like they kind of flip between anxious and avoidant depending on how you're interacting with them. Once you get closer to them, they all of a sudden might become avoidant and feel a sudden need to very much withdraw. It's like they feel this duality. Like, I really want to connect with people, but I'm also so petrified of connection. And it puts them in a bit of a freeze state. Like, there's this feeling that I'm kind of like paralyzed. I don't know what to do in this relationship. I don't know whether to come close or to pull away because I have both of these needs that feel so strong within me.
Why, Dr. Franco, do attachment styles matter?
Mm. Yes. So our attachment style really impacts how we give and receive love, and thus our ability to build healthy relationships with other people.
Wow. Does everybody have an attachment style?
Yeah, we all have an attachment style. It's basically like we all come into new relationships which with a set of assumptions, and those assumptions define our attachment style.
Okay. So, can you give me We know that the four attachment styles we've already talked about: secure, avoidant, anxious, and disorganized.
Disorganized, yeah.
Can you give me four signs of each attachment style?
Sure. Yeah. So let's think about this practically in our relationships. If you're with someone securely attached, you set a boundary with them, they accept the boundary. They don't try to push it, change it. They don't suddenly pull away because you set that boundary. If you're with someone securely attached, they're comfortable being vulnerable. You'll see that they're being vulnerable with you, but almost in a more reciprocal way. Like they'll be vulnerable, they'll wait for you to be vulnerable back, then they'll be more vulnerable. Whereas someone avoidantly attached really won't be able to be vulnerable. If someone is securely attached, they can address you directly, but not confrontationally. So let's say this is in a friendship context, right? Where, it feels like the friendship has been one-sided. The securely attached friend will say, I love you. I want to be close to you. And I've noticed I've been the one reaching out and that's been hurting me. And I want our friendship to continue. So I figured I'd bring this up. So those are some signs of securely attached people. Anxiously attached people, their core fear is that everyone will abandon them. So you can tell what someone's anxiously attached when they're almost like willing to give up their sense of self to be in relationship with other people. So they're like hyper accommodating often until it really blows up and then they become the opposite. When it comes, they anxiously attach people because they fear abandonment. They're not necessarily good at setting boundaries. So they might agree to things and then it seems like they're resentful about it. We talked about, egoistic giving, that they're generous oftentimes to get people to like them. They're attracted to relationships with people that don't seem to like them very much because they've learned that they had to earn love. So you'll see an anxiously attached person having these friendships with people or these relationships with people that kind of mistreat them because that makes them motivated to earn love. And that's what they learned about love, that it's something that's earned, not freely given. And then avoidantly attached people, you'll know they're avoidant because they're never vulnerable. You don't feel like you really know them. When you maybe do have a moment of intimacy and closeness, they suddenly pull away and you're like, what the heck is going on? They have a lot of shame, but they don't really admit to it. So they're really struggle with things like apologizing, whereas anxiously attached person is going to over apologize. The avoidantly attached person is going to say, no, this is not my fault. This is kind of your fault. They just don't tend to put much effort into their relationship. So if you feel like, man, this person, I'm trying to connect with them, they're not really meeting me there, and that person might be more avoidantly attached. Like I can't get them to like try. They're not really trying. That might be a sign of avoidant attachment. That being said, of course, attachment is not stagnant. In different relationships, we can have different attachment styles based off of the attachment style of the other person. So, it's hard to say based on your interactions with one person what their attachment style is.
What about somebody who's disorganized? What are some of the signs that you're kind of in a relationship or a friendship with somebody who has a disorganized attachment style?
Yeah, so the disorganized attachment style is it's not organized, right? So it feels like chaos. Sometimes they want you to get really close, sometimes they're pushing you away. Um, Sudden withdrawal. They're they're they have trouble regulating their emotions because their relationships have not helped them do that in the past. People have not validated their feelings. So you might get more escalation, more anger. They might be interpreting your actions with a lot of negative intent, like you're going out of your way to harm me, to kind of destroy me. And and so it'll kind of feel chaotic. Like you kind of will be like, what is going on? Like I thought we were just connecting, and they have a kind of very different interpretation of the situation. And usually with a disorganized attachment style, there's a history of a pretty brutal background, like a
Hmm.
history of some sort of abuse in childhood.
Is it easier to spot someone's attachment style in yourself or in somebody else?
You know, one way that I hear other people's attachment style is like how they perceive other people. So, the the insecure attack with anxious people, you hear them say like, all my relationships are fragile, or everybody's going to kind of abandon me. And the avoidance, you'll hear them say, nobody can be trusted, right? And when you have this one template about everybody, it's a sign that it's not actually everybody, because you're not actually discerning each person. You just are coming in with this understanding and superimposing it onto the present, which is what attachment style is really. Um, so when I hear someone secure, though, they always try to give people the benefit of the doubt while having boundaries. So they'll say things like, "I had to love that person from afar," and they can admit that
Mm.
even when even though we didn't maybe like when they talk about their exes, there'll be some complexity. Like it didn't work out for this reason, but I like them for this reason, instead of like my ex was, just evil. So you'll hear that complexity with securely attached people, and you'll hear them trying to trying to be as loving as possible to people while also having them recognize what they need for themselves. So kind of both things. There's just more nuance with securely attached people. And avoidant, I'm sorry, I'm answering your previous question, but I'm realizing, so I have so many more thoughts on this. Whereas avoidantly attached people actually have memory issues because they block out their emotion. If you ask them to talk about things, they are not very expressive. Like it's hard to get them to describe things. It's hard to get them to describe what they think or what they feel, because our emotions are big indicators of what we think and feel, and our opinions in our internal world. So it'll almost feel like, with someone avoidantly attached, it's like, yeah, the conversation is maybe when it's specifically when you talk about relationships, the conversation doesn't go as deep. Whereas anxiously attached people, their memory, they tend to misremember things and remember things as more negative than they actually were. So
Mm.
that's really interesting quirk, attachment theory and memory. But back to your major question, which was, is it easier to recognize in yourself and someone else? Honestly, I think anxiously attached people tend to be so hungry for information as to how to improve. So when I talk, anxiously attached people are ready, they follow up with me and they're like, that's me. Like, I'm anxiously attached. I cling. I'm so afraid everyone's going to abandon me. I think everybody's judging me. So I think often anxiously attached people, they hear, the basics of attachment theory, and they kind of, quickly see themselves in it. That's not happened to me as much with avoidantly attached people. Again, they struggle with vulnerability. So I imagine it would be harder to say I'm avoidantly attached and I've had these struggles in the past.
So
Avoidant,
if I have a
yeah,
question about that, because that's
sure.
fascinating. If you are avoidantly attached and you're listening to somebody talk about attachment theory, given that somebody that has an anxious attachment style might immediately self-diagnose, might immediately see themselves, what is an avoidant attachment style person likely to experience as they're learning about attachment styles and
Mm.
considering themselves as they're listening to you, Dr. Franco?
Yeah, discomfort. When you get deep with avoidantly attached people, or you try to get them to acknowledge some of their wounds, they feel very uncomfortable with that, and will kind of, maybe they'll stop listening. Honestly, I mean, this obviously depends, and honestly, there's some research that finds that if you're in a relationship with someone who's avoidant but has humility, there's a lot better outcomes. Whereas if the avoidant person is like, everything's your fault and I'm fine and you're being sensitive and right, then it's going to be really hard to connect with that specific form of avoidant attachment. But so there has to be, with an avoidant attachment, a willingness to to look at yourself and to be conscious of your patterns, which I think anxiously attached people tend to be more willing to do. If you're having conflict with an avoidant person, often they are just stonewalling, or they're
Mm.
ghosting, or they're minimizing, or they're saying like, we're not going to talk about this. Like, basically anything related to relationships and intimacy really scares and overwhelms avoidantly attached people. Like, sometimes we think of anxiously attached people as more sensitive, in that they get really overwhelmed when a relationship's not going well. But so do avoidantly attached people. They just express it. They express that sensitivity through removal. Like it's they can't, they're so overwhelmed emotionally by relationships, by intimacy. And so they're stonewalling, which is a sign of being emotionally overwhelmed. They're being closed off, they're being dismissive, because it's too emotionally overwhelming to look at some of their own patterns. Because fundamentally, avoidantly attached people have a lot of shame. If you tell them they've made a mistake, they have this core belief that I am a failure, that I am deficient. They probably won't admit that to you. Right. But anytime you try to offer a critique to an avoidantly attached person, that you might trigger that core wound of I'm a failure, I'm deficient, which is why it can feel so hard for an avoidantly attached person to hear some of their patterns and hear some of their dynamics.
You are going to finally get some answers to questions that I am sure have been on your mind for a long time. Questions like, why do I always feel left out in my friend group? Why do I always date the same losers over and over and over again?